Hello, this talk was given as part of a workshop for the Kesho project recently in 2024. I hope you enjoy.
We're presenting on part of my PhD work, just going through the scenario process. You'll notice my process might be a bit simpler. The Kesho tool can be quite detailed. So this is just a bit of background on my study area, which is Yala wetland. It's a very important, ecologically and economically important wetland. Provides important resources that are used by the local community. It's found on the shores of Lake Victoria. And there's been a number of issues of concern in the wetland, including mostly land conversion for both small scale and large scale agriculture, biodiversity loss, overexploitation, and conflicts. So this is just a slide showing some of the challenges that have come up. So the study was mainly a participatory one. So there's been a lot of work done on Yala wetlands. There's been a lot of back and forth about how do we conserve this wetland at the same time realize its full potential. And Nature Kenya did first did a study on economic valuation of the wetland. They found the economic value of the wetland is very high compared to the local community. Then Nature Kenya did a really good, they came up with a land use plan which is currently going through the regions and the county government. So trying to see how to balance that development. But one of the things that has really come up is how well were the community actually involved. So that's why I decided to do my PhD work on now taking the views of stakeholders, that's community members, people involved in conservation, county government, and so on. So yeah, as I mentioned, this was the participatory scenario work that I did, which was the third objective of my PhD. I also did some GIS mapping, which I'm not presenting here, and I used another tool called the matrix model, which also helps to link land use with the ecosystem services that have been provided. So these are the steps in the scenario planning process. So the first step is presenting the goals of the workshop. Scenario scoping, so what we talked about is setting the boundaries and so on. Then we did some stakeholder mapping with the people who are actually there. So we had done some pre-workshop sort of mapping to get the right people, but we actually also sat with the participants and said, okay, who is represented here? Who do you think is missing? Whose voice is also needed here? Then we did a trend analysis, looking at the history and background of Yala wetland, what kind of changes have happened. Then the selection of critical uncertainty, and explain that in more detail. Then we developed a scenario framework and did the storylines around all that. And then we did a consistency and probability analysis. Okay, so now these are the steps in detail. The first, presenting the workshop goals. Basically, we had a session because for some of the workshops we have in the local communities, it's very important to sit with them, explain exactly what the workshop is about. For me, I was trying to understand how the community actually uses the wetland and to develop some scenarios of what changes might happen later on. Then we discussed key ecosystem services based on some work I had done with them before, where we identified the ecosystem services. So papyrus for matchmaking, fish, areas for farming, water provision, all these ecosystem services we had already identified. Then we did scenario scoping, so how far is our study actually going to area? We all agreed on the extent of Yala wetland, also making reference to our maps. And then we looked at the temporal extent, which is 2030 for the short term, 2063 based on an EU agenda 2063. So then we did the stakeholder mapping. We looked at who are the stakeholders who are represented here. So you can see the top, the fishermen, curators, weavers, water supply people, navigators, fish sellers, farmers, bird watchers, people who engage in grass harvesting, water transport, and so on. So then we did the trend analysis and cluster ranking. So basically looking at what are the major land use changes that have happened in Yala wetland. Then we looked at some of the major factors that drove land use change. So what was going on? Was it governance? Was it politics? Was it demand for land utilization and so on? Then we ranked the major drivers of change, which I'll explain. We were able to identify the major drivers of change in the wetland. The ones in the green, we group them under land use change. The ones in the maroon, resource use, things like overharvesting. Then there was pollution in the grayish, light blue, environmental change, things like flooding, soil erosion, and so on. And then the dark blue was governance issues. So those were the 5 major drivers of change. So now we presented the drivers of change, we explained to them what exactly is in each. Then we asked them, write on a piece of paper. Maybe if you're not somebody who speaks so much in workshops, you can just write your answer on a piece of paper. Then now we rank them, put them together, and then rank them. If you see the 3 groups, all of them identified land use change. So now that we have our main drivers of change, we said, okay, let's look at each driver and try to decide what are 2 extremes. So for example, with land use change, what could be 2 extremes of change in this driver? And the same with governance. Then we developed storylines under each scenario. These are now the 4 quadrants where you put in your storylines based on what's happening. Then now you discuss policy options for each alternative future. Yeah, so this is now what came out. I won't explain each one in detail, but just to touch on them. So this is group 1. They had governance and land use. They said on one extreme you could have conservation-oriented land use. On the other extreme, you could be fully development-oriented. These are the 2 when it comes to land use change. In terms of governance, it could either have top-down, where government is controlling everything, and community-led governance, where now the community are more in charge. So if you look, for example, at the ERA scenario, the top right, if you have community-led governance with development-oriented land use, they said you have conflict among community members because they are the ones sort of trying to control the resources, but everyone wants to develop and go into agriculture and all that. You have high pollution because of the development angle. You have wetland encroachment because people now, government wants to be in control, so people will be getting into the wetlands anyhow. You have diseases from chemical use, and again, poor infrastructure because government is sort of hands-off, so the community are running it. On the other side, if you had, let's say, top-down governance with conservation-oriented land use, you'd have loss of livelihoods. Why? Because if government is in control and they've decided this place we are conserving it, we're not allowing any agriculture, the locals will be less likely to be able to farm. You have conflict between politicians and government because now maybe the community are complaining they can't access the wetland. And the local politicians are now trying to fight against government on this. Then you have increased infrastructure again because government is coming in to build roads and all that. That was basically how we went from identifying the drivers all the way to coming up with scenario storylines. And I had mentioned that you can do an internal validation of your workshop. So this is what we did for ourselves. Each group came up and gave feedback. This is our scenario, this is what we had there. Then we as a group scored the scenarios. Because some of them sometimes, maybe the stories are 2 or 3 just like scenario storylines. So you have to sort of rank them to see, is this really plausible, or maybe some of the things you've put are not so plausible. Another way to do a validation is to compare it, so to do a consistency analysis with other scenarios that have been done. Then finally, because we presented some policy recommendations under each scenario, this is what actually came from the stakeholders themselves. Implementing the other wetland land use plan, formulating land governance and ownership policies, sustainable farming, enforcement of SCR practices, especially for these large-scale agricultural projects like the one that's happening in Ghana, establishing centers for agricultural production, enhancing public participation, and formulating county-level conservation policy and conflict resolution mechanisms.